Do I have sound? Yes, perfect. Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Hi. Come on, Vegas, man. Anyway, I'm very happy to welcome you all. It's nice to see such a big room. Last year, I had many less people because I was competing with a Playboy application by Vertigo. So it was kind of hard. But anyway, today, apparently, it's less interesting, the rest. So I guess everybody's pretty excited about what we saw this morning. Personally, I'm very excited because, finally we have the possibility to develop on so many screens. WPF for very rich client applications running on Windows. Silverlight out of the browser for desktop applications, a little bit lighter, running on the Mac as well. Silverlight in the browser, and now Silverlight on the phone. That's great. And the good thing is that everything we will see today applies to all those screens indifferently. I'm going to show you samples in WPF, samples in Silverlight. The tools and frameworks that we are going to see work in both environments, or I should say 3 environments, because we have the phone now. Okay, so overnight we became mobile developers. I think that's really cool. But the good thing is that you don't need to learn new things. Okay. So with that, my name is Laurent. I work for IdentityMine. I am what they call a senior user experience integrator, meaning that most of my job happens in expression Blend. And I'm going to show you quite a lot of things running in Blend today. IdentityMine is based in Seattle. We are specialists in user experience, especially in the domain of WPF, Silverlight, Windows mobile phone applications, Surface, etc. And myself, I'm located in Zurich in Switzerland. So let's start by understanding what does MVVM mean. Okay, so that's kind of a weird acronym. It stands for Model-View-Viewmodel. And if you want to be very popular, you can use some very catchy phrases like, I'm going to do MVVM in a sloob with slut, which means I'm going to do MVVM in a Silverlight out-of-the-browser application with the Silverlight unit test framework. More seriously, though, WPF and Silverlight are really built on top of MVVM. So even if you never used intentionally MVVM, you actually already used it. A simple example of that is the controls. All the controls in WPF and Silverlight are actually a mini MVVM application if you want, because they have code, they have dependency properties, expose, binding, and they have a template, and they have a strict separation between the template and the code. There is also quite a lot of confusion around MVVM, and I hope that this session helps to clarify that a bit. When we talk about MVVM, this is really just a pattern. Okay? It's also known as presentation model. I'm sorry, could you just stop the timer? That would be great. Just that I know approximately, because I have a lot of things to show you, so I don't want to bother Rob Eisenberg, who comes after me. So yeah, MVVM is really just a the pattern. So also known presentation model. Okay, we are going to talk about that in a moment. And in addition to that, you have really a lot of MVVM frameworks out there. MVVM toolkit, I do one myself, so I'm guilty of that too. Those are really just helpers around the pattern. Okay, so we are going to try to differentiate clearly what is the pattern itself, what is MVVM, and what are helpers helping you to build Silverlight and WPF applications. So to understand where does presentation model or MVVM pattern come from, let's talk a little bit about those separation patterns. Probably the best known is MVC, Model View Controller. That's the interactions. And this is a very old pattern, very well known. It has been used since probably the 80s with Smalltalk back then. Okay. It is still used widely, especially ASP.NET MVC, Rails, etc. Now, a variation of the MVC pattern is called the passive view pattern. And this one was developed by Martin Fowler. And here is the interaction. So the advantage that we see here is that the view is completely passive. And since the view is passive, since it's not actually reacting to anything, okay, you don't need to test it, at least not in unit tests, which is good because testing a view is very difficult, automatically at least. you most often need a human operator to test the view to make sure that everything reacts correctly. So with a passive view pattern, you don't need to test the view. The controller has a lot of responsibility, and since the controller is code, you can test it. Now there is another variation of the passive view pattern, which is called presentation model pattern. And here the controller is replaced by what we call a presentation model, also known as a view model. The interactions look like this. And here we see the difference. The view is a little bit more active. The view is actually pushing information to the view model. And just before I said it's good when the view is passive. So what is the trick here? Well, the trick is really when you have a framework with data binding, for example, like WPF and Silverlight, then you don't really need to worry about this, about the view being active, because that's built in the framework. So you don't need to test data binding. Microsoft did that for you. Okay? So you can really expose as much code as possible in your view model. You can unit test that. The view is quite passive, not as passive as in the passive view, but on the other hand, you have this whole very powerful data binding network or system to support you. So that's really cool. I want to talk a bit about blendability. So there are a couple of sessions, actually 3 sessions about MVVM at Mix. And when I saw that, I wrote an email to the guys and I said, well, what are you going to talk about so that we avoid overlap? So I'm going to concentrate a bit on blendability here. The other areas where MVVM helps you a lot are testability, because you can test your view model. So a big part of your client application is testable. And of course, maintainability, because you can, since your components are pretty separated, you can replace one by another one without having to modify the others. Okay? Now, blendability is the ability to be edited in Expression Blend, okay, and Visual Studio Designer, because since both use the same architecture, what works in Blend actually works mostly in the Designer of Visual Studio as well. So to achieve blendability, there are 2 things which are important. First of all, you should be able to differentiate in your code runtime from design time. Why? Because Blend is actually loading code and executing code. Okay? It's not just a passive development environment. So sometimes it will find places where it cannot execute the code, and it's going to crash. Blend is actually not crashing itself, but what happens is that you have a beautiful exception screen, and you cannot design against that. So the first part is identify those places where Blend cannot display the screen, and isolate that. And then the other thing which helps for blendability is to provide design time data, so that your designers who work in Blend or integrators have something to design against. That's very useful. For example, if you work against a service which doesn't exist yet, okay, that happens more often than we think. The service is developed at the same time as the client application. So then you can provide already dummy data. Okay? Also, sometimes you just cannot connect through Blend to a service, for example, a WCF service. It just doesn't work. So you can provide design time data. So with that, let's see a demo. Here we go. OK, so here I have a Silverlight application. But again, I want to stress that everything I show you works actually in WPF as well. So this Silverlight application has a reference to a WCF service, which is returning a list of customers. And then I have a high-level service. I'm going to make that a little bit bigger. I have a high-level service which is on top of my WCF service. Okay, I like to do that because it allows me to really abstract my data source completely. So that's pretty convenient. Now this service has one method called getCustomers. And this method